Hello, I'm Jasper Thompson. For 25 years, I was a husband, a father, a respected architect. Today, I'm here to tell you how I destroyed all of that with one unforgivable mistake. It was a Tuesday evening when my world imploded. I was standing in our bedroom, mine and Celeste's, staring at my phone. The message on the screen read, "Thanks for last night, same time next week." 9 words that represented the end of my marriage and the man I thought I was. I'm not proud of what I'm about to share. For 5 months, I led a double life. To the world, I was still Jasper Thompson, devoted husband of 25 years. But behind closed doors, I was someone else, a cheater, a liar, a man consumed by selfish desires. The affair started slowly. Celeste and I had been drifting apart for years. Her career was thriving while mine stagnated. Our conversations grew shorter, our intimacy less frequent. I felt invisible, unimportant. Then Vivian, my new assistant, entered the picture. Young, vibrant, full of admiration for my work. She made me feel alive again. What began as innocent flirtation quickly spiraled into a full-blown affair. Each encounter was a mix of exhilaration and gut-wrenching guilt. I told myself I would end it, but I didn't. I couldn't. The thrill was too addictive. But secrets have a way of surfacing. When Celeste discovered the truth, the look in her eyes haunts me to this day. It was as if I had reached into her chest and crushed her heart with my bare hands. In just 7 months, I went from planning our 25th anniversary to signing divorce papers. I lost my wife, my home, my children's respect, and the man I used to be. All for what? Fleeting moments of pleasure that now taste like ash in my mouth. This isn't a story of redemption. It's a cautionary tale about the true cost of infidelity. The pain I caused Celeste, the parts of myself I lost forever, and the regret that now colors every aspect of my life. I'm sharing this because if my story can prevent even one person from making the same devastating choice, then perhaps some good can come from my pain. The fantasy isn't worth the reality. The momentary pleasure isn't worth the lifetime of regret. This is The Unfixable Mistake, How I Destroyed My Marriage and Myself. It's not an easy story to tell or hear, but it's a story that needs to be told. What follows is the raw, unvarnished truth of how I ruined the best thing in my life and why I'll never be the same again. As we approached our 20th anniversary, the cracks in our marriage began to show more clearly. Looking back, I can see the signs were there long before, but I was too caught up in my own world to notice or address them. Celeste and I had always been different. She was ambitious, driven, always reaching for the next rung on the career ladder. I was more content, satisfied with where I was professionally. At first, these differences complemented each other. But as the years went by, they started to create a wedge between us. Around our 18th year of marriage, Celeste received a major promotion. She was ecstatic, and I was proud of her, truly. But with this new position came longer hours, more business trips, and less time for us. Our conversations, once filled with dreams and laughter, became quick exchanges about household logistics and our kids' schedules. I found myself spending more evenings alone, nursing a glass of whiskey and wondering where we'd gone wrong. The silence in our house was deafening. When Celeste was home, we orbited each other like strangers, going through the motions of a shared life but rarely connecting. Our intimacy suffered too. Nights that were once filled with passion became perfunctory if they happened at all. I couldn't remember the last time Celeste had looked at me with desire in her eyes. I felt invisible, unimportant, a relic of her past that she'd outgrown. I tried to talk to her about it, but our conversations always seemed to end in frustration. She'd accuse me of not supporting her career. I'd retort that she was neglecting our marriage. We were speaking different languages, unable to bridge the growing gap between us. As our 20th anniversary approached, I found myself losing hope. The woman I'd fallen in love with, the life we'd built together, it all seemed like a distant memory. I started to wonder if this was all there was to look forward to. A lifetime of polite coexistence, of settling for less than what I wanted. I wish I could say I fought harder for us, that I suggested counseling, or made more of an effort to reconnect. But the truth is, I retreated into myself. I threw myself into my work, started staying late at the office, anything to avoid coming home to the emptiness of our relationship. It was during this time that Vivian joined my firm as my new assistant. Young, vibrant, full of admiration for my work, she was everything Celeste no longer seemed to be. I found myself looking forward to our interactions, relishing the way she made me feel seen and appreciated. Looking back, I can see how vulnerable I was, how primed for the mistake I was about to make. But at the time, all I knew was that for the first time in years, I felt alive again. The loneliness, the frustration, the growing resentment, it all created the perfect storm for what was to come. I stand here now, years later, wishing I could go back and shake some sense into that version of myself. To tell him that marriages have ups and downs, that the grass isn't always greener, that the temporary thrill isn't worth the devastation it would cause. But I can't. All I can do is share my story, in the hope that others might learn from my mistakes. Because what came next would change everything, and set in motion a series of events that I can never undo. The decision to cheat wasn't a single moment, but a series of small choices that led me down a path I never thought I'd take. It started innocently enough. Late nights at the office with Vivian, working on projects. She'd laugh at my jokes, ask for my advice, make me feel important in a way I hadn't in years. One night, after a particularly successful presentation, we decided to celebrate with a drink. One drink turned into several, and I found myself opening up to her about my marital problems. Vivian was sympathetic, understanding. She placed her hand on mine, and I felt a jolt of electricity I hadn't experienced in years. I'd like to say I stopped it there, that I went home and recommitted to my marriage, but I didn't. The next day, the flirting intensified, stolen glances across the office, accidental touches as we passed documents back and forth. It was exhilarating, intoxicating. The first kiss happened a week later. We were working late again, and as I leaned over to look at her computer screen, our eyes met. Before I knew what was happening, we were kissing. I pulled away, mumbled something about it being a mistake, and fled the office. That night, lying next to Celeste, I was racked with guilt. I told myself it would never happen again. But it did. 2 days later, we kissed again, and this time, I didn't stop. From there, it spiraled quickly. Stolen moments in my office, clandestine meetings in hotels. Each time, I swore it would be the last. Each time, I went back for more. The guilt was crushing, but the thrill was addictive. Hiding the truth became a full-time job. I created fake business meetings, imaginary client dinners. I started keeping a separate phone hidden in my desk drawer at work. I became hyper-aware of every detail, making sure no lipstick stains were on my collar, no unfamiliar scents clung to my clothes. Living with the guilt was like carrying a boulder on my chest. Every time Celeste smiled at me, every time she asked about my day, it felt like a knife twisting in my gut. I'd lie awake at night, listening to her breathing, hating myself for what I was doing to her, to us. There were moments when I almost confessed. Once, on a rare night when Celeste and I were both home, she cuddled up to me on the couch and said, "I've missed this, I've missed us." The words were on the tip of my tongue. But fear held me back. Fear of losing everything, of hurting her, of facing the consequences of my actions. As the affair continued, I found myself living 2 separate lives. There was the Jasper, who was a husband and father, going through the motions of family life while feeling like a fraud. And there was the Jasper who was Vivian's lover, feeling alive and desired but consumed by guilt. The worst part was, I started to resent Celeste. I blamed her for my unhappiness, for driving me to this. It was easier than facing the truth, that I was weak, selfish, making choices that would destroy everything I held dear. 5 months in, I knew I had to end it. The guilt was eating me alive, and I was terrified of getting caught. I told Vivian it was over, that I needed to focus on my marriage. She didn't take it well, threatening to tell Celeste everything. I managed to calm her down, promise we could still be friends, still work together. I thought that was the end of it. I vowed to recommit to my marriage, to be the husband Celeste deserved. But the damage was done. The lies, the guilt, the divided loyalties, they had changed me in ways I couldn't undo. And then, just when I thought I was in the clear, everything came crashing down. Celeste found a text on my phone. The one I thought I had deleted. "Thanks for last night, same time next week." In that moment, as I watched the color drain from Celeste's face, I realized the true magnitude of what I had done. The pain in her eyes, the betrayal, the shock, It's an image that will haunt me for the rest of my life. I had made the unfixable mistake, and now I would have to face the consequences. The day my world imploded started like any other. I woke up, kissed Celeste goodbye, and headed to work. Little did I know, it would be the last normal morning we'd ever share. That evening, I came home late, as had become my habit. Celeste was in the kitchen, her back to me as I entered. I called out a greeting, but she didn't respond. When she turned, the look on her face stopped me cold. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her expression a mix of fury and devastation. "Who is she?" Celeste's voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through the room like a knife. I tried to play dumb, but my heart was racing. "What are you talking about?" She held up my phone, the one I thought I had hidden so carefully. "I found this in your desk drawer. You left it unlocked." My blood ran cold. I had been so careful, but one small mistake was all it took. One forgotten text, one unlocked phone, and my entire house of lies came tumbling down. What followed was the most painful conversation of my life. Celeste had read everything, not just the most recent messages, but months' worth of texts between Vivian and me. She knew the extent of the affair, the lies I had told, the times I had chosen Vivian over her. I tried to explain, to apologize, but every word out of my mouth sounded hollow even to my own ears. Celeste alternated between icy silence and bursts of raw anger. She hurled questions at me that I couldn't answer. "How could you do this to us? To our family? Was she worth it? Do you love her?" The truth was, I didn't love Vivian. What we had was purely physical, a misguided attempt to feel young and desired again. But how could I explain that to Celeste without making it sound even worse? As the night wore on, the full impact of what I had done began to sink in. This wasn't just about the affair. It was about the months of lies, the betrayal of trust, the shattering of our life together. With each passing hour, I could see Celeste withdrawing further into herself, building walls that I wasn't sure I'd ever be able to breach again. Around midnight, Celeste quietly asked me to leave. "I can't look at you right now," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I need time to think, to process all of this. Please, just go." I spent that night in a cheap motel, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of our confrontation. I called in sick to work the next day, unable to face Vivian or anyone else. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from Celeste's family, our friends. Word had spread quickly. Over the next few days, Celeste and I existed in a painful limbo. I was allowed to come home, but I slept in the guest room. We moved around each other like ghosts, the silence in the house oppressive. Our children, sensing the tension, became quiet and withdrawn. A week after D-Day, as I came to think of it, Celeste sat me down for another talk. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were distant. "I've been thinking," she said. "I think we need some time apart. Real separation, not just sleeping in different rooms." My heart sank, but I knew I was in no position to argue. I had done this. I had broken us. If Celeste needed space, it was the least I could give her. I moved out the next day, taking only what I needed for a few weeks. As I packed my bags, the reality of what I had done hit me full force. This wasn't just a rough patch. This was the potential end of my marriage, my family, the life we had built together over 25 years. The first few weeks of separation were a blur. I threw myself into work, trying to avoid the pitying looks from colleagues who had heard about my marital troubles. Vivian had been transferred to another department, thank God, but her absence was a constant reminder of my mistakes. Celeste and I communicated mainly through terse text messages about practical matters, bills, the kids' schedules. Any attempt I made to discuss our relationship was met with silence or a curt, "I'm not ready to talk about that." I started seeing a therapist, trying to understand why I had made such a catastrophic choice. The sessions were painful, forcing me to confront ugly truths about myself, my insecurities, my selfishness, my inability to communicate my needs in a healthy way. As weeks turned into months, the hope I had been clinging to, that this was just a temporary setback, that we would eventually reconcile, began to fade. Celeste's demeanor towards me shifted from anger to something almost worse, indifference. Looking back now, I can see that Discovery Day wasn't just the day my affair came to light. It was the day I lost everything that truly mattered to me. My wife, my family, my self-respect, all gone because of choices I had made. The man I was before the affair died that day. In his place was left a shell, haunted by regret, struggling to find a way forward in a life I had irrevocably altered. The road ahead was long and painful, and I was only beginning to understand the true cost of my unfixable mistake. As the initial shock of discovery wore off, I desperately tried to salvage what was left of our marriage. My first attempt was a heartfelt letter to Celeste, pouring out my remorse and begging for another chance. I left it on the kitchen counter of our family home, now occupied only by her and our children. Days passed with no response. Undeterred, I sought out marriage counseling. I found a highly recommended therapist and asked Celeste if she'd attend with me. To my surprise, she agreed, though her eyes remained cold and distant during our first session. For 6 weeks, we sat across from each other in Dr. Patel's office, rehashing the pain and betrayal. I thought we were making progress. I spoke of my regret, my desire to rebuild trust, my commitment to change. Celeste listened, occasionally nodding, but rarely engaging beyond surface-level responses. On our last session, Celeste finally broke her silence. "I appreciate your efforts, Jasper," she said, her voice steady. "But every time I look at you, all I see is your betrayal. I don't know if I can ever trust you again." Those words shattered what little hope I had left. Still, I persisted. I sent flowers to her work, left voicemails apologizing, even tried to recreate our first date at the Italian restaurant where we fell in love. Each gesture was met with polite acknowledgement, but the spark I was desperately searching for remained absent. I threw myself into self-improvement. I attended support groups for unfaithful spouses, read every book on affair recovery I could find, and continued my individual therapy. I thought if I could just become a better man, Celeste would see how much I had changed and give our marriage another chance. But as months passed, I began to understand why my attempts were failing. The trust, once broken, was nearly impossible to rebuild. Every kind gesture I made was tainted by the memory of my betrayal. Celeste couldn't help but wonder if my actions were genuine or just another form of manipulation. Moreover, my efforts, while well-intentioned, were focused on erasing the past rather than accepting its permanent impact on our relationship. I wanted Celeste to forgive and forget, to go back to the way things were. But that was impossible. The affair had fundamentally changed us both. Celeste, once open and loving, had built walls around her heart that I couldn't penetrate. She had learned to live without me, to be strong on her own. My presence in her life now represented pain and betrayal, not love and support. I also realized that my attempts at reconciliation were, in part, motivated by my own guilt and fear of losing the life I had known. I wasn't fully considering what Celeste needed or wanted. I was trying to fix things on my timeline, not hers. The final blow came when Celeste asked me to meet her at a cafe we used to frequent. For a moment, I felt a flicker of hope. But as soon as I saw her face, I knew. "Jasper," she said softly, "I think it's time we accept that our marriage is over. I've filed for divorce." In that moment, I understood that sometimes, no matter how much you want to fix something, the damage is too severe. My unfixable mistake had created a chasm between us that no amount of effort could bridge. Our attempts at reconciliation failed, not because we didn't try, but because some wounds are too deep to heal. The trust, once shattered, couldn't be fully restored. The pain, once inflicted, had changed us both irrevocably. As I walked away from that cafe, I realized that the real act of love now was to accept Celeste's decision and let her go. It was the hardest thing I've ever had to do, but it was the right thing. Sometimes, the only way forward is to accept that you can't go back. The aftermath of our failed reconciliation and Celeste's decision to file for divorce was like navigating through a storm. Everything familiar was suddenly foreign, and the future I had always imagined disappeared in an instant. Celeste changed in ways I never expected. The warm, nurturing woman I had married became distant and businesslike. During our divorce proceedings, she was coolly efficient, treating our 25-year marriage like a business transaction to be dissolved. It was painful to watch, but I understood it was her way of coping, of protecting herself from further hurt. I, on the other hand, felt like I was drowning. The guilt, which had been my constant companion since the affair began, now threatened to consume me entirely. I lost weight, couldn't sleep, and found it hard to focus at work. The man who once confidently led architectural projects now second-guessed every decision. The divorce process itself was a grueling experience. Dividing up 25 years of shared life into yours and mine felt surreal. Each item we split, the house, cars, bank accounts, was a reminder of the future we'd planned together, now shattered. Celeste was fair in the division, almost to a fault. She didn't try to punish me financially, which somehow made me feel even worse. Her detachment was its own form of punishment, far more effective than any vindictive action could have been. Our children, now young adults, struggled to navigate this new reality. They were angry with me. Understandably so. Family dinners, holidays, and celebrations, once joyous occasions, became complicated logistical challenges filled with tension. As news of our divorce spread, I watched our social circle divide. Some friends tried to stay neutral, but most sided with Celeste. I couldn't blame them. I was the one who had destroyed our marriage. Invitations dried up, and I found myself increasingly isolated. Celeste, on the other hand, seemed to flourish in her newfound independence. She threw herself into her career with renewed vigor, took up new hobbies, and even started dating again. Seeing her thrive should have made me happy, but instead it twisted the knife of regret even deeper. The final paperwork came through on what would have been our 26th anniversary. The irony wasn't lost on me. As I signed the documents that officially ended our marriage, I felt a chapter of my life closing definitively. In the end, the aftermath of my unfixable mistake left us both changed, but in vastly different ways. Celeste emerged stronger, more independent, but with a hardness that hadn't been there before. I was left a shadow of my former self, weighed down by regret and the consequences of my actions. The life we had built together was divided, but the pieces would never quite fit into our new, separate lives. The aftermath wasn't just about splitting assets or changing relationship statuses. It was about learning to exist in a world that had been fundamentally altered by one terrible decision. As I walked out of the lawyer's office that day, divorce papers in hand, I realized that the true aftermath of my mistake was just beginning. The papers were signed, but the ripple effects of my actions would continue to shape both our lives for years to come. In the years following the divorce, both Celeste and I attempted to move on with our lives, but the shadow of our past loomed large. Celeste found new love relatively quickly. About a year after our divorce was finalized, she reconnected with an old college boyfriend, Marcus. From what I heard through our children, they were happy together. Celeste seemed to have found the partnership and trust that I had destroyed. While a part of me was glad she had found happiness, I couldn't help but feel a pang of regret every time I saw them together at family events. As for me, moving on proved far more challenging. I dated sporadically, but found it difficult to form meaningful connections. Every new relationship was colored by the guilt and shame of my past actions. I was constantly on edge, afraid of making another mistake, of hurting someone else the way I had hurt Celeste. About 2 years after the divorce, I met Olivia. She was kind, understanding, and seemed to accept my past. We started a relationship, and for a while, I thought I might have a second chance at happiness. But as things got more serious, I found myself pulling away. The ghost of my affair haunted every interaction. I'd catch myself being overly transparent about my whereabouts, showing Olivia my phone unprompted, overcompensating in ways that only highlighted my lingering guilt. Olivia tried to understand, but my inability to fully open up and trust myself in our relationship eventually drove a wedge between us. After a year and a half, she ended things, telling me that she couldn't compete with the regret that still consumed me. The truth was, I didn't know how to be in a relationship anymore. The man I was before the affair no longer existed, and this new version of myself was too damaged, too cautious to love freely. Every potential moment of happiness was tainted by the memory of what I had thrown away. I found myself envying Celeste's ability to move forward, to trust again. She had been the one betrayed, yet she found the strength to open her heart once more. Meanwhile, I, the betrayer, remained trapped in a prison of my own making, unable to forgive myself, and therefore unable to fully connect with anyone else. As I watched life move on around me, Celeste happy in her new relationship, our children growing and starting their own families, I realized that the true consequence of my unfixable mistake was not just the loss of my marriage, but the loss of my ability to fully participate in life and love again. The regret didn't fade with time as I had hoped it would. Instead, it became a part of me, a constant reminder of the happiness I had so foolishly thrown away. Looking back on this journey, the lessons I've learned have been hard-won and deeply painful. The most important thing I've realized is that there's no such thing as a small betrayal in a marriage. Every lie, every secret, every moment of infidelity, no matter how brief or seemingly insignificant, has the power to destroy everything you've built. I've learned that love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice you make every day. It's choosing your partner over momentary desires, choosing honesty even when it's difficult, choosing to nurture your relationship even when it feels stagnant. The grass isn't greener on the other side, it's greener where you water it. I spent years neglecting my marriage, focusing on what I thought I was missing, rather than appreciating and nurturing what I had. By the time I realized my mistake, it was too late. To those who might be considering an affair, or who find themselves in a similar situation to where I was, my advice is simple but crucial. Communicate with your partner. If you're feeling unfulfilled or disconnected, talk about it. Don't let resentment build up. Seek help early. Marriage counseling isn't a last resort. It's a tool to help you navigate difficult times together. Remember why you fell in love. It's easy to focus on the negatives when things are tough, but try to recall what brought you together in the first place. Set boundaries and stick to them. If you find yourself attracted to someone else, create distance. Don't put yourself in situations that could lead to temptation. If you make a mistake, come clean immediately. The longer you hide it, the more damage you'll do. Most importantly, understand that the temporary thrill of an affair is not worth the devastating long-term consequences. The pain you'll cause your partner, your family, and ultimately yourself far outweighs any momentary pleasure. I lost everything because of my unfixable mistake. Don't let my story become yours. As I conclude my story, I want to emphasize the far-reaching consequences of infidelity. It's not just about the act itself, but the web of lies, the broken trust, and the irreparable damage it causes to everyone involved. The ripple effects of my actions didn't just end my marriage. They changed the entire trajectory of my life, Celeste's life, and the lives of our children. What I thought would be a fleeting affair altered family dynamics, friendships, and even my relationship with myself. The person I was before the affair no longer exists, and the guilt and regret I carry are a daily reminder of what I lost. To those watching who might be contemplating infidelity or who are currently involved in an affair, I implore you to reconsider. The momentary excitement or validation you might feel is not worth the devastating aftermath. If you're unhappy in your relationship, address it head-on. Seek counseling, have those difficult conversations, or if necessary, end the relationship with integrity. For those who have been betrayed, my heart goes out to you. Your pain is valid, and healing is possible, even if reconciliation isn't. I urge all viewers to share this video. Your share could be the wake-up call someone needs to avoid making the same mistake I did. It could be the support a betrayed partner needs to know they're not alone. If this story has resonated with you, please leave a comment. Share your thoughts, your experiences, or your questions. Let's create a dialogue about fidelity, trust, and the true value of committed relationships. Remember, a moment of weakness can lead to a lifetime of regret. Choose wisely, communicate openly, and cherish the love you have. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it serves as both a warning and a catalyst for strengthening your own relationships.